Hello viewers. Many of you have asked me what the purpose of this macvlan-200 thing is, which I mentioned or which you have seen in my previous videos, for example about unifi or directors or any other videos which I have actually created. And the reason is that because I'm running quite a lot of containers, as you will see in all my videos, I have basically run into limitations with first a 16 address macvlan and then a 32 address macvlan, obviously, because like I said, other containers or container systems have more than one service, and for each service I am issuing an IP address. So I sat down and thought long and hard what can be done to actually get around this problem, and the answer is an actual VLAN which comprises the entire 192.168.0 or 200 or whatever range from address number 0 to 255. Now with Synology there is a little bit of a, not problem, but a caveat. The thing is, we cannot create virtual network interfaces based on our physical interfaces, at least not in the graphical user interface. There is the command line to the rescue, and this is what I would like to say right in the beginning of this video. We are going to use the command line quite extensively, and we are also going to implement a script, edit it and save it with the VI editor. So if you are a command line hater or just are not very comfortable with the command line, there will be trouble ahead. Not really trouble, but well, you might not like it very much. Anyways, I will take you step by step through the implementation of the prerequisites, namely the thing creating a VLAN on your router, creating the necessary interface on the Synology, and lastly, creating the macvlan actually in your container environment using Portainer. So let's get started, and I hope you will have fun. As many of you know, I am using a unifi environment for my routing and for my network equipment. So I'm going to show you how to implement a VLAN with the unifi environment. However, this is just an example, and most probably you can easily transfer this guideline to your router environment if you use, for example, EdgeMax or Cisco or MikroTik or whatever. So that's not really difficult. It's about the principle. So I'm already logged on to my unifi network application, and I'm heading over to Settings and Networks. Here we can create basically all our subnets and VLANs, whatever we like. And it's pretty much straightforward. You click on New Virtual Network and you follow this form. I've already done that for us. So I'm going to show you the actual VLAN for my containers, which I can click on here. And as you can see, I've given it a network name called containers. You can call it whatever you like, but I suggest to use something which actually tells you what it is for. Next, we have the drop-down for the router, and if you are completely unified, pardon the pun, you can select your router from this drop-down. If you're only using, for example, the network equipment like switches and access points from unifi and use a third-party gateway, then you select the second option. And then you go to that gateway and actually implement your VLAN there. Next, I have removed the tick mark next to auto-scale network because I want to decide what the number of the actual network is. In this case, I have chosen exactly this one here, and the net mask is /24 because, as I said earlier, I want to have the entire range, address range available. Automatically, unifi proposes the gateway IP of 200.1, which is very important for our later configuration, so remember that. And of course, it's also telling us what the broadcast IP is. Also implementation-wise, we need this later in our script. Next, I activated the manual configuration for the advanced section. because also here I want to issue my own VLAN ID, and I just call it VLAN 200. For the rest, I left it as it is, except I turned off DHCP. The reason is that we do not want our unifi router to issue any IP address in this range, because first of all, we are going to configure everything else later on the macvlan side in Portainer. Secondly, it doesn't make sense to have DHCP activated since we are mostly implementing server applications. And because they are server applications, we always want them to be on the same IP address. Just imagine you have a mail server which permanently changes its IP address. That's not really helpful. Or you have a Pi-hole service which also changes always permanently its IP address. Not helpful. So turn it off. It's not helpful at all. Okay, once you're happy with the settings you have put into this form, you can click on Create. The button is not here right now, but trust me, if you create a new network, it will be there. And once you've done that, your unifi environment will quickly go to a dive and come up again after a few minutes, because this VLAN thing information is now distributed to all your router's access points and whatever you have in your network. First part done. Now we go to the next part, second part, which is to convince our Synology NAS that there is this VLAN and that it has a foot in there. As you can see, I'm already logged onto my Synology on the DSM, and as I said, we cannot create this particular network interface, a virtual network interface, through the graphical user interface, unfortunately. However, not being available in the graphical user interface doesn't mean that it's not possible at all. That's why I said earlier, we are going to use the command line. And on the command line, we are going to run a certain shell script. This shell script you can download from the download link in the video description, and I suggest you do that right now, unpack it and open it in a text editor. I purposefully say text editor because please do not use a word processor. Some people have done so and were surprised that the whole stuff doesn't work afterwards, because word processors want to prettify things. And that means they are changing certain characters or sequences in our file without us knowing it to make them pretty, and afterwards these letters or characters or whatever it is not what it's supposed to be. So please use a plain old text editor, and I personally use VS Codium. Your mileage may vary, and if you're interested in VS Codium, there's also the download link down in the video description. I have already opened our script here, and the first line which is of interest is line 11. On Synology, this file needs to be placed into this particular folder. Very good. We're gonna remember this path later on. For now, we know it's there. Next, there are two lines which are very interesting. This script will be running each time our Synology boots. But there's one thing about commands which about the IP command. Everything which we do with the IP command is only valid during the runtime of our machine. So if the machine or the operating system reboots, the whole IP configuration will be standard and null and void. However, sometimes, particularly on Synology, I don't know whether there are certain tricks in place which make these settings persist. So I'm starting this script with two commands which make sure that we are starting on a green field. Next comes the section where we actually create this virtual interface. This is line 23, and there are actually three places where you have to become active. The first one is here, ETH0. This is basically the name of your first physical interface on your Synology, basically where you plug your cable in. Sometimes the name is not ETH0. Sometimes, particularly when you implement the Synology's virtual machine manager, the name of this interface changes. Changes to what, you ask? Easy to find out. Now we open our command line. You log on to your Synology with SSH. I assume you know how that works. And once you're there, you run the command ifconfig. Now you get a whole long list, but in order to find out the name of this interface, you scroll upwards and you always look for the IP address of your Synology which you used to log on with DSM. And in my case, I found it here. And of course, it is ETH0. However, as I said, if you have Virtual Machine Manager implemented, then it is OVS-ETH0 or something else. But I'm sure you will find it with this instruction. So in that case, you replace ETH0 with this particular name. Then we give in the script this virtual interface a name. In my case, I call it ETH0.200. The first part representing actually the name of the physical interface, and after the dot, the number of the virtual LAN or the VLAN. You can call it whatever you like, but I suggest to use something which makes clear what it is, what it is sitting upon, and what the purpose is. Okay. Now comes an important section like type VLAN. So this interface will be a VLAN interface, and the VLAN ID will be 200, which corresponds with what we were using in unifi earlier, or on your router. Now, the following line is very interesting as well. Now we're adding an IP address to this particular interface. This is number .2 from our newly created network. Remember what we did on our router. And then we have the broadcast address, which is given here. You could also see that earlier on unifi. And now, of course, we are tying this to our newly created interface from line 23. And on line 25, we just start this interface, make it ready to accept connections. The next section is very interesting and very important as well, because by nature, container hosts cannot communicate with their containers and vice versa. The Docker developers claim this is a feature. I say this is neither a bug nor a feature. It's just a nuisance. But there is also, as you can see, a workaround available. And that is basically creating a bridge interface on top of our newly created VLAN interface. This is what's done in line 28. And all you have to do is maybe change the name after link to what you have in line 23 behind name. Very easy. Then comes the type of the basically network interface, that is macvlan, and the mode is bridge. We're creating a bridge over something. Next step, like before, we're adding an IP address to this newly created interface, which is mvlbr.200, and the IP address is 200.254/32, which tells you that this is a host and not a network. So this network or IP address you have to remember, because if you want to talk from a container to the container host, this is the host's address. This is the address of Synology for your container hosts. In the next step, we bring up this interface. We start it to make it clear, make sure that it can receive traffic. And then comes a delete command for a route. When we set up our interface on line 23, 24, 25, a route was created automatically. However, it doesn't work, it doesn't help us, it's just in the way, that's why it's being deleted in line 31. Since we need a proper route to get from our Docker host or container host into the VLAN, respectively backwards, we need to create a route and tell Synology how to get into this 200.0/24 network, and that's via the MVLBR200 interface. So everything's in place right now, and if you made any changes, save them right now, because now comes the next step where we put everything which is in this script in our editor onto our Synology into the right path. To do that, after saving it, you press Command A, which marks the whole thing. Now you press Command C, which puts it into your clipboard. Now go back to your terminal session with Synology. I'm pressing Ctrl L now to give us a proper and open window here so that you can see what I'm doing. Now we go over to that folder which we saw earlier, cd/usr/local/etc/rc.d. Now we can create the script based on what we have in our clipboard. Since this script will be positioned in a system folder, we have to use root rights to create it. That's why we are going to be using the sudo command, like sudo vi vlan.sh. Not clan, VLAN. Thank you very much. So what are we doing here? We fetch root rights. We call the VI editor and open the non-existing vlan.sh file, which means VI will create it for us. We press enter. We have to enter the password of our user, which we used to log on to our Synology. So here we are. The VI editor is open. Now to basically get our contents into this ominous thing, we press the I character on our keyboard, lowercase I, and in the lower left corner there is now the insert marker. Now press Command V on Mac or Control V on Windows, and everything which was in our or is in our clipboard has been pasted in here. Now the next step is just simply to save the whole thing. To do that, press on your keyboard Escape, now colon, W, Q, and now Enter. That's all. Now we have our file in place. And now let's have a quick look at it in the file system. For that we use the command ls-al. And here we see our file. It's in place, it's there, everything hunky-dory. Or is it? As you can see, the permissions indicate that it is not executable, and this is something we have to change now. Again, we have to pull root rights with sudo. Now chmod, change mod, and now comes the permissions. We have full rights for root and read and execute for root group and read and execute for everybody else. And now the file, of course, vlan.sh. Let's have a look at it again, ls-al, and here you can see we have the proper permissions now in place. In order to get the whole thing now actually implemented on your Synology for the first time, you could either reboot the system, like with the command sudo reboot. I'm not doing this right now. Or you could actually execute it. Since we are root, we could, or not root, we use sudo again, sudo./vlan.sh, and then it will run automatically and perform all these steps. There will be two messages when you do that for the first time, saying there is no such device like MVLBR200. There is no such device like E0.200. Perfectly okay. We expect that to happen. So no problem ahead. And for the rest, everything will run fine. If you want to find out if everything has been put in place correctly, there is no use going to Synology and OpenDSM and looking in the network configuration. I'm going to quickly show you what's going to happen. Here we are. I'm opening the control panel, network interface, and obviously mayhem. No, not really mayhem, but there is not even an IP address or a subnet mask or anything, and the VLAN says it's 200. So don't worry about what's given here. What the user interface tells you, forget it. The truth is, as I usually say, on the command line. And if you want to find out if your implementation went through correctly, just use the command ifconfig again. And now you can see that there is, in my case, E0.200 with the appropriate IP address. And we also have our bridge interface in place with the appropriate IP address as well. So that tells us that our script worked properly and everything is in place. By the way, this script has been proven to also survive any DSM upgrades, so don't worry about what they bring out. This thing will still be in place, and shouldn't it be, just pull it back. You know how to do this now. And by the way, if you want to get rid of the whole thing, that's very, very easy. Just go back to the folder which I showed you, or which is visible here in the command line, use a local etc/rc.d and remove our file, reboot, and everything's gone. Couldn't be easier. In the next step, we can now implement our macvlan on our container side, and I'm going to use Portainer for that purpose. Before I continue with this video, a few words how you can support this channel. I am offering Patreon memberships, 3 levels, and all of my Patreon members can watch my videos completely free of ads. Furthermore, I am answering all your comments and questions on Patreon with priority. As I said, there are 2 more membership levels, Plus and Plus Plus. There you get 10, respectively 25% discount on my consulting rates, and if you would like to book a session with me, there is a link down in the video description. Of course, there is the completely free of charge YouTube subscription, and if you haven't done so yet, please take your time now to click on subscribe and don't forget to ring the bell, because then you will get a notification each time I'm issuing a new video. And by the way, if this video is helpful or at least entertaining, it would be awesome if you could leave me a like, because that helps this video and the channel to position itself optimally in the YouTube algorithm. But now let's continue with the video. Here I'm logged on to my Portainer installation, and I'm going to connect to the container host. And I'm going to head straight for the networks, because this is where the magic is going to happen. As you can see, I have already implemented everything on my side. So this is why I'm going to show you these things just on an example base, so that you can actually follow how the steps how to create each part of the network. Because on Portainer, it is creating a macvlan is a 2-step procedure. First, we create something they call a configuration. I personally call it a template, but it doesn't matter, it's a configuration. And based on this configuration, we can finally then create the actual macvlan. It's one of these things, but yeah, we can just do what they want us to do and create on add network. Now you give this thing a proper name, which distinguishes it from everything else, and you know what it actually means. In this case, since we are going to create the configuration, I'm going to call it MVL-200-TPL for template, and I'm just going to, in this case, add the word demo at the end. So should I just do something stupid, I can find out where it is or what it is. Okay, you gave it a proper name on your side. Now we have to select the driver for this particular configuration. This is going to be macvlan. And as I said, this is a two-step process. We first create our configuration, which is highlighted by standard, and now we have to enter the name of our parent network card. And you know exactly what it is because you entered it in your script earlier. And looking back at the script, you can find it in line 23 here behind the word name. Should you have something different than eth0.200, just use that name here in this case. So I'm entering the name of the parent network card, eth0.200. Now we have the IPv4 network configuration. The subnet, we used that already earlier on the unifi side. That is 192.168.200.0/24. And the gateway, it's set on the unifi side as well. If we go back here, this is the gateway IP, so we can just transfer this here, 192.168.200.1. The IP range itself is the same as the subnet. That's the whole idea. We want all the 254 addresses, or 53 actually, to be usable for us. 192.168.200.0/24. Next comes the point with the excluded IPs. Many of you have asked, why don't you actually exclude any IPs in your macvlans? That has a reason, because it doesn't help us. Technically, it's a good idea because the container implementation creates a DHCP service for each macvlan which I implement. Cool thing, so basically if I don't issue any IP addresses manually, the container manager takes care of that for me. However, as I said earlier, we are implementing servers or services which should be always on the same IP address. And if we don't issue IP addresses manually on each host reboot, each time the Docker or container host starts, it issues IP addresses on a first in, first out basis. So containers which start very quickly get their IP addresses first and the others later. So there is no way to determine which container gets which IP address if I rely on the DHCP service. This is why we always issue IP addresses manually, so that we can be sure that we can reach our container or containers on the predefined known IP address. Okay. And should we use the DHCP service, these excluded IP addresses will not be issued. Nice idea. Since we are using the manual approach of issuing IP addresses, the excluded IP addresses don't count for us because we can override this manually left, right, and center, and the only effect which we're going to have from that is chaos, because there is another caveat with that. We cannot edit macvlans, neither on command line nor in Portainer. There is no way to do it. The only way to actually edit it is to delete it and recreate it. What does that mean for us? We would have to recreate all our macvlans each time we want to exclude another IP address. That cannot be helpful. That's why I say just don't do the work, just leave it as it is. Don't bother with it. Just go ahead and scroll down and say create the network. If you entered everything correctly, there will be a success message, and we can take the next step and create the actual macvlan based on this configuration. For that, you click on Add Network again. Now give it another name which indicates what it is. I call it MVL-200-demo. Call it whatever you like, just make sure you recognize what it is later. For the driver, again, we use macvlan, but this time we click on Creation, and now we get a drop down, and from this drop down we choose our template or the configuration macvlan. There is nothing else we can do on this side or in this dialog. Just click on Create the Network, and if everything went fine before, you should see a success message. The results should look pretty much like I have it here. I have a MVL-200, driver is macvlan, and here I can see basically my subnet and my gateway. This indicates that everything's in place and will be working. From now on, you can use this macvlan, which you just created, for your stacks, for your containers, everywhere. I'm just going to show you with the example of unifi from last week. If I go into the editor, I did that already. I chose an IP address from this macvlan range, and I referenced the macvlan here down in the network section with name MVLAN-200. So from now on, this network is entirely yours. Now if we head over to our unifi network application, just as an example, and we look at our client devices, you will see your containers filling up, and they will be showing up here on the network, and you can see the network addresses here, and actually also the traffic they are receiving or sending out, which is pretty cool. Now you can start thinking about, hey, what else can I do on a firewall or router side with this configuration? So basically you can start thinking about how to steer your traffic, how to create certain firewall rules which prevent traffic ingress into that network or egress out of this network. It's all up to you how you want to protect your container network from here on. And one more thing. Just imagine you had two Synologies, each running Container Manager and each having containers available for you in the network. You could create a VLAN for one Synology and for the other, and maybe for another. For each container host, you could create its own VLAN for its containers. Just the idea is mind-blowing and opens up so many possibilities. This brings me to the end of this video about macvlans. I hope it was useful or at least entertaining to watch. In both cases, it would be awesome if you could leave me a like, because that helps this channel tremendously. For today, thank you very much for watching and see you soon. Bye-bye.